On this Tuesday night, gridlock at a busy border crossing.
We're putting the pressure because we want the attention.
The latest protest, this time at a crucial route between the U.S. and Canada. Saskatchewan's premier plans to drop all public health restrictions, plus the pressure on other provinces to do the same.
A decision was made to wedge, to divide, and to stigmatize.
The Liberal MP criticizing his own government's handling of the pandemic. And a tale of two Olympic experiences. American-born athletes representing China in Beijing.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight at one of the busiest international border crossings, the latest place to be targeted by protesters demanding an end to all public health restrictions in Canada. This blockade of the Ambassador Bridge began last night. It is the busiest land border crossing in North America and a major route for transport trucks. The Ambassador Bridge stretches from Windsor, Ontario to Detroit, Michigan. It accounts for over 25% of the two-way traffic between the two countries, roughly 8,000 trucks daily. About 30% of the trade between Canada and the U.S. uses the bridge. The blockade isn't just affecting the flow of goods. Many people who live in the Windsor area, including essential workers, use it to commute, and the closures are causing massive delays at other ports of entry too. Our Sean O'Shea is in Windsor, Ontario tonight. Sean?
Donna, Windsor police were caught off guard by this protest on Monday, and now, as a result, all truck traffic into Canada has been stopped. Protesters who oppose mandatory vaccinations and mask mandates are blocking the area behind the Canada Border Services Agency checkpoints, in effect closing off all traffic, saying they have the right.
Our lives have been hijacked for 2 years. Literally, hijacked.
This was the lineup of trucks on the Detroit side. Now they've been diverted to a less convenient and distant crossing at Sarnia, Ontario.
It doesn't make sense to disturb the rest of the public, right? So they shouldn't be blocking the borders, or they shouldn't be blocking the roads.
The protest also affected U.S.-bound trucks. This was the long lineup of trucks in Windsor waiting to cross.
Such blockades will have serious implication on our economy, on our supply chain.
The shutdown didn't take much planning or heavy equipment. Only a handful of big rigs plus pickup trucks and protesters on foot. Police watching and blocking access roads, nothing more.
But we're putting the pressure because we want the attention. Right? We want our cause to be heard.
Shutting down the bridge is a way that these people have bonded together here to say, hey, listen, we're trying to get attention so there can be communication.
This trade route, more than others in Canada, supports auto manufacturing and other key industries. Delays of any kind are bad for business.
It's urgent that governments do everything possible to ensure a peaceful resolution immediately.
Windsor police told us their job is to try to keep the peace. As for any kind of enforcement, removing the trucks or reopening the border, there are no plans to do that here. Not right now. Donna.
All right, Sean O'Shea in Windsor, Ontario, thanks. Protesters have demanded all public health restrictions be dropped, including the lifting of mask mandates and other measures imposed by provincial and civic governments. Today, Saskatchewan's premier outlined his province's plans to do that. Premier Scott Moe says as of Monday, proof of vaccination to enter indoor venues will no longer be required. Mask mandates and isolation requirements are set to be removed at the end of the month. Late today, Alberta's premier said the time has come to live with COVID. Jason Kenney is beginning to lift public health restrictions, what he calls a path back to normal, and he is ending the proof of vaccine requirement as of midnight tonight.
The threat of COVID-19 to public health is no longer outweighs the hugely damaging impact of health restrictions on our society, on people's mental health, on their emotional well-being, on our broader social health. So now is the time to begin learning to live with COVID.
There remain more than 1,500 people with COVID in hospital in Alberta. Our Heather Yourex-West is in Coutts, Alberta, where protesters resumed a border blockade. Heather, what are they telling you tonight?
Well, they've been listening to the developments from the Premier very closely. We know that, as you mentioned, as of midnight tonight, the proof of vaccine program will end. Next week, school children will no longer have to wear masks to school. From there, on March 1st, the indoor mask mandate will also be lifted. This is something that protesters have been asking for, but will it be enough for them to end their protest that is now into its second week? Likely not. The protesters I've spoken with say they also want to see an end to federal vaccine mandates, even a change in government.
I'm sick of having my kids wear them masks in school. I don't want my daughter breathing carbon monoxide in and out all day. Hopefully the mandates get dropped, and then it'd be nice if Trudeau took a flying hike. He could get lost.
I think he meant carbon dioxide. Heather, authorities say the blockade is illegal. How are the RCMP likely to respond?
Well, RCMP told us today that they have two major objectives here. One is to maintain the peace. The other is to ensure that border access remains open, as well as access to the local community. Now, at this hour, I can tell you most of this afternoon, that is happening. Traffic is getting through the border. The mayor of Coutts says that he does not want to see the RCMP take a heavy-handed approach to protesters, adding that many of these protesters are actually members of the community.
I just mentioned that the people that are protesting are your neighbor from down the road. And so it's not the kind of guys that are trying to wreck stuff and create noise and pollution and doing all the stuff that you heard of other places. And so it requires a different treatment from the RCMP.
Still, RCMP say there have been illegal activity at this protest over the past week. They have investigations open, and they say charges will be laid. The Alberta government is saying that this is an illegal protest, an illegal blockade. It needs to end. Whether that will happen now that the Alberta Premier has outlined a plan to lift restrictions provincially, that is something that we will have to wait and see. Donna?
Oh, all right, we will. Heather Yourex-West in Coutts, Alberta. Thank you. Now, in Ottawa, the protest there was quieter today. There is a court injunction in place to stop the honking, and police say they've issued more tickets and made more arrests. Lots of trucks remain on the streets near Parliament Hill, though, and as Ross Lord reports, police say there are children in many of those trucks.
On the first full day of a court ruling that limits noise from truck horns, the occupation at the foot of Parliament Hill is quieter. But after allowing the protesters to become embedded here, Ottawa City Police insist they are determined to get rid of them.
There is absolutely a need to end this. We are actively working to do it through peaceful, progressive negotiations, but we also have looked at enforcement angles to move us ahead.
But how soon? To follow through, City Police say they need an additional 1,800 officers and civilian personnel from other police agencies. It's unclear how many have been procured.
The federal government, through the RCMP, has been proactive in providing a tangible, concrete support by assigning 275 RCMP officers who are now working closely with the OPS, the OPP to enforce community safety.
Ottawa Police say they've made 22 arrests, issued more than 1,300 tickets, and there are dozens of ongoing criminal investigations, including one following the alleged attack of an officer.
If and when the time comes to remove these vehicles, it's unclear who will do the moving. Every company on the City of Ottawa's go-to list of tow truck drivers has rejected requests to move heavy vehicles from downtown.
They rely on heavy truck industry for their livelihood, and they don't want to damage that part of their business.
Polling shows a clear majority of Canadians oppose the occupation, but protesters say they've received enormous support from people driving to Ottawa, mostly from other parts of Ontario.
If you think that this is just a fringe movement, and there's only a small percentage of Canadians think there's something nefarious going on with our government and in our country, then you're dreaming.
For police, there are numerous considerations. They say almost a quarter of the 418 trucks encamped in the city have children living in them, complicating any discussion of how to proceed with a possible operation.
We're not at the stage of looking to do any sort of enforcement activity around that. We'll rely on the Children's Aid Society to help provide and give us guidance around that.
Still more questions than answers as the occupation continues. Ross Lord, Global News, Ottawa.
The protests are taking a toll, including on businesses in Ottawa, and they're racking up policing costs. A little later, we'll take a closer look at some of those costs. First, a Liberal MP from Quebec has publicly criticized his own government's policies and provincial public health measures. Joel Lightbound says political leaders have failed to explain their rationale for keeping restrictions in place and are causing division by their unwillingness to adapt. As David Aiken explains, Lightbound wants a clear road map to returning to normal. David?
Well, Donna, you know, the Prime Minister has responded to these convoy protests by arguing they represent a minority, that most Canadians are united on the importance of vaccine mandates and so on. Well, today, Justin Trudeau cannot even claim his own caucus is united on that point.
I can't help but notice with regret that both the tone and the policies of my government changed drastically on the eve and during the last election campaign.
Joel Lightbound became the first Liberal MP to call for a roadmap to end vaccine mandates, to end vaccine passports. And he claimed other Liberals feel the same.
I can tell you that I'm not the only one who feels, to varying degrees, as I do within our ranks.
Elected to a Quebec City area riding in 2015, Lightbound has been a Liberal MP with promise. Among other things, he's been parliamentary secretary to the finance minister, an appointment that is often a prelude to going into cabinet. Now, he's resigned as chair of the Quebec Liberal caucus, and he says his own party is part of the problem.
A decision was made to wedge, to divide, and to stigmatize.
We Conservatives could not agree more.
While Conservatives cheered, the Prime Minister seemed sympathetic.
I can understand frustrations with mandates, but mandates are the way to avoid further restrictions or having to be restricted. As people get vaccinated, as Canadians have gotten vaccinated, we've been able to get through things.
But a new poll out Tuesday found 44% of vaccinated respondents said they sympathize with the concerns and frustrations of Parliament Hill protesters. In any event, Lightbound will find his caucus colleagues disagree with what he did and how he did it.
I got some problems with it, frankly. I think he said that the debate has been politicized. I think saving lives is much more than a political debate. It's a fact, and it's something we need to do, and it's something we've been relentless in doing over the last 2 years.
Lightbound says he wants to remain a Liberal, but some in the party may seek to toss him out of the National Caucus altogether when it meets behind closed doors Wednesday morning. Donna.
All right, David Aiken in Ottawa, thanks. On the same team, but a world apart, coming up, the different experiences of two U.S.-born athletes representing China at the Winter Games. The Winter Olympic Games are an opportunity for athletes to showcase their talents on the world stage. It is supposed to be all about athletic achievement, but politics inevitably seeps in. Eric Sorensen has the story of two U.S.-born athletes who have chosen to compete for China at the Games.
Eileen Gu may be the biggest star of these Olympics, and that was before her spectacular double cork 1620 to win gold in the free ski big air. She is known as the Snow Princess in China. She has multiple endorsement deals, and she happens to be American. Raised in California, Gu decided to compete for China, the birthplace of her mother. And like so much about these games, politics now weighs heavily on her story. Her post-victory news conference peppered with questions about choosing China over America.
Here's the thing. I'm not trying to keep anyone happy. I'm an 18-year-old girl out here living my best life. Like, I'm having a great time.
Picking China symbolizes for some an ascendant nation. This Beijing resident says it proves China's sports and commercial environment is superior to the United States. But only to a point. Zhu Yi, another American-born athlete, competed for China, but when she fell more than once in figure skating, it was not only heartbreaking for her, it angered many Chinese that she was selected over homegrown athletes. Attacked on social media for stealing other people's dreams, Chinese censors stepped in. From a Uyghur athlete lighting the Olympic cauldron to a tennis player disavowing earlier claims of sexual abuse, critics say the host country is using the Olympics to whitewash its image. And no images seemed more politically charged than the leaders of China and Russia meeting during the Games.
A desire to assert for their own countries a place on the world stage. The fact is sports
has been political from the beginning of time, and every Olympics has had an element of politics.
Meantime, Eileen Gu has been denounced by some back in the U.S.
Everything about her is awful. Boo.
Gu could be beloved in either China or the U.S., but not, it seems, in both during these politicized games. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
A former Canadian women's soccer coach has pleaded guilty to 3 counts of sexual assault and 1 count of sexual touching. Charges against Bob Berarda were laid over a year ago for crimes committed between 1988 and 2008. He was the head coach of the Vancouver Whitecaps women's team and the Canadian under-20 women's team. Both organizations cut ties with him in 2008. More than a dozen women have come forward with allegations Berarda acted inappropriately. Protests come with a cost. Ahead, how the disruptions are affecting businesses and trade.
You're watching Global National.
There's some good news tonight for potato farmers in PEI. The U.S. has agreed to resume shipments of island potatoes to Puerto Rico. That represents about a quarter of PEI's potato exports to the U.S. Those exports have been on hold since November when potato wart was discovered in 2 PEI fields. The fungus poses no threat to human health but can reduce crop yields. Puerto Rico does not farm potatoes commercially, so the risk is low. Well, bans like that have a big economic impact. The ongoing so-called Freedom Convoy protests are also having an impact. There are huge costs to the city of Ottawa for policing, and lots of small businesses already battered by the pandemic have had to close. Tonight, Anne Gaviola takes a look at the economic costs of these protests.
It's really disheartening.
First Bite Treats in Ottawa's Byward Market started the year off with a lockdown. Then the protest convoy descended on nearby Parliament Hill. The financial toll is significant as people and delivery services shun the downtown core.
It's in the thousands, and it's racking up.
The Rideau Centre, Ottawa's largest mall with 175 shops, has been closed since the weekend, affecting thousands of employees and neighbouring businesses. Mall owner Cadillac Fairview says the continued closure of an important community space, loss of employment income, and the financial impact on clients is heartbreaking, given our shared pain and sacrifice during the pandemic. Policing costs for the City of Ottawa are $800,000 for policing, plus $1 million in city services every day. The city is asking for help from provincial and federal governments, including 1,800 more officers, which would bring daily policing costs to $2.5 million. For context, security for a Canada Day celebration runs north of $600,000. This eclipses that. Uncertainty about how long this drags on could mean long-term damage to tourism, hospitality, and retail.
Even if they leave next week, could they be back in a month? Could they be back in 2 months?
With cross-border traffic disrupted, analysts expect the price of goods trucked in to go up the longer this continues, especially food, and that's on top of existing supply chain-related inflation. The RCMP tell Global News they don't yet have a tally of policing costs to taxpayers as multiple divisions are involved, but they'll have one soon.
The mental cost that this can actually place on people is something we haven't thought about, but it's something that should be considered.
This could be a major disruption if the government can't find a way to bring this back under control and unite everybody politically, socially, and economically.
The biggest price to pay may not be easy to put into dollars and cents. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
We don't talk about Bruno, no.
Let's talk about the Oscars then. Next, can this year's nominees still spice up the big screen?
No. He told me I'd grow a gut, and just like he said.
The stage is set for Hollywood's biggest night. The 2022 Oscar nominations are out, and once again, the box office is no longer playing a lead role. Half of the movies nominated for Best Picture either debuted or were quickly released on streaming platforms. Mike Drolet reports on the evolution of the movie business.
And the Oscar goes to...
There was a time the Oscars would routinely draw over 40 million viewers.
Last year, fewer than 10 million watched a show that lacked songs, spectacle, and star power. Are the Oscars still even relevant?
I think they think they are. I don't know if any awards ceremony, now that there are more than 4 channels and that you can avoid the Oscars on the Sunday night that they happen if you want to, I don't think any awards ceremony has that level of importance.
The last year was another tough one for the movie industry. Memories of packed theaters and blockbusters seem distant.
Here are the nominees for Best Picture.
Of the 10 movies nominated for Best Picture, most, including West Side Story, Nightmare Alley, and Belfast, have yet to make money at the box office. King Richard and Dune, from Canadian double nominee Denis Villeneuve, were released in theaters and streaming services at the same time. The others, including The Power of the Dog, with its 12 nominations, are streamers. The industry's in transition, even if movie lovers believe epics like Dune are meant for the big screen.
I don't think theaters will ever go away. I think streaming has carved out a bigger space than anyone would have expected in the time allotted. But that's mostly because of the pandemic forcing everyone to stay home, watch movies at home, and realize, if you have a pretty decent setup, it's cheaper, it's more comfortable, and you can not leave your house.
I'd like you to take me with you.
Whether it's a distant world or the Old West, movies still captivate us.
You are marvelous, Rose.
And that golden Oscar, no matter how many people watch, is still the ultimate prize for those who set out to captivate. Mike Trelay, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is Kimberley, British Columbia. There are beautiful spots all over this country. Please email us yours to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.